I didn't notice when he became the person I checked with, not out loud, not directly, but inside my head. At first, it felt harmless. I would think of him after making a decision, not before. A passing thought. A comparison. He'd understand this. He'd see why I chose it. I told myself that didn't mean anything. But then I started pausing. Just for a second. Just long enough to imagine his reaction. He never asked me to do that. He never suggested it. He barely gave opinions at all. When he did speak, it was measured and calm, like he was describing something that already existed. One day, I realized I hadn't made a spontaneous decision in weeks. That was when it occurred to me. Not that he was influencing me, but that I was slowly reorganizing myself around his presence. He didn't insert himself into my life. He positioned himself just close enough to be relevant. He remembered small things. Timing. Patterns. The way I hesitated before answering certain questions. The way my tone changed when I felt unsure. He never pointed it out, he adjusted to it. Once, I asked him why he never interrupted me. Because interruptions create resistance, he said. I don't need resistance. I laughed, thinking it was a joke. He didn't. Later that night, I replayed the conversation. Not his words, my reaction to them. How quickly I'd accepted the explanation. How little I'd questioned it. I realized then that he wasn't trying to be convincing. He was being consistent. The first time I felt dependent, it wasn't emotional. It was cognitive. I was explaining something to someone else and caught myself thinking, this isn't how I'd say it to him. I stopped mid-sentence, corrected myself, and continued, but the moment stayed with me. Why did his understanding matter more than theirs? I told myself it was respect. That I valued clarity. That I liked being seen accurately. All reasonable explanations. What I didn't admit was how unsettled I felt when he wasn't there to confirm my conclusions. That night, I messaged him something trivial. A thought I didn't need answered. He replied hours later with one sentence. That's not the real question you're asking. I stared at the screen longer than I should have. Because he was right. And I hadn't realized it yet. After that, doubt became quieter and more precise. I didn't second-guess everything. Just specific things. The moments that mattered. I would reach a conclusion, feel confident in it, and then a subtle hesitation would appear. Not fear. Not confusion. Just a pause that asked, "Are you sure this is complete?" He never contradicted me outright. He refined. "You're not wrong," he would say. "You're just stopping early." That sentence stayed with me. Because it didn't challenge my intelligence, it questioned my depth. I started revisiting decisions I'd already made. Not to change them, but to understand them the way he might. And slowly, without realizing it, his perspective began to feel like the final version. I noticed the shift the first time I defended him, to myself. Someone questioned his intentions. Casually. Without malice. I felt irritation rise faster than I expected. I explained him calmly, clearly, as if I'd rehearsed it. Only later did I realize I hadn't explained why he was harmless. I had explained why he was necessary. That scared me. Because necessity implies structure. And structure implies reliance. And I had always believed I was careful about those things. When I mentioned the conversation to him, he listened quietly. "You don't need to protect me," he said. I know, I replied. But we both understood. I already had. The first time I questioned my own memory, I laughed it off. I was sure I'd said something. Certain. But when I brought it up, he tilted his head slightly, thoughtful. I don't remember it that way, he said. Not defensive. Not dismissive. Curious. I tried to reconstruct the moment. The context. The exact wording. And suddenly, my certainty thinned. Maybe I'd misphrased it. Maybe I'd implied more than I meant. He didn't insist. He let the doubt settle on its own. Later, alone, I realized something that made my stomach tighten. He hadn't told me I was wrong. He'd let me decide that myself. And the unsettling part was how natural it felt. To trust his memory over my own. The first time I defended him, it surprised me. Someone made an offhand comment about his tone. About how calm people like that usually have something to hide. I felt a sharp instinct to correct them, not angrily, not emotionally, but precisely. You're misreading it, I said. He's not cold. He's deliberate. The words came out smoothly, as if I'd rehearsed them. Only later did I realize what I'd done. I hadn't described him. I'd justified him. That night, I replayed the conversation, trying to locate the moment where my perspective had shifted from observation to alignment. I couldn't find it. The transition had been seamless. And that frightened me more than any argument would have. I started filtering my thoughts before they fully formed. Not because I was afraid of being wrong, but because I didn't want to disappoint a version of him that existed in my head. I anticipated his silence. His raised eyebrow. The quiet pause that meant think again. He never asked me to agree with him. He never asked me to change. But I noticed how often my reasoning ended in the same places would have. Once, I caught myself thinking, he'd say this more clearly, and rewrote a message I was about to send, not to him, but to someone else. That was when I understood. His voice wasn't replacing mine. It was calibrating it. I asked him once if people ever misunderstood him. He smiled faintly. Not amused, acknowledging. Frequently, he said. They assume influence requires effort. I asked him if he cared. Only when it's inaccurate, he replied. That answer settled something in me. Because I realized how much I valued accuracy now, more than comfort, more than reassurance, more than ease. I had stopped wanting to feel certain. I wanted to feel correct. And somewhere along the way, I had decided that he was the measure of that correctness, not because he demanded it, but because he never rushed to provide it. The realization didn't come as panic. It came as absence. I was alone, thinking through something that should have been simple, and noticed how unfinished my thoughts felt. Not wrong, incomplete. Like I was missing a reference point I'd grown used to without noticing. I tried to imagine how I felt about it. Not how he would frame it. Not which question he'd ask. Just my own conclusion. It took longer than it should have. That was when it hit me. I wasn't waiting for his approval anymore. I was waiting for his perspective. And without it, my certainty felt hollow. I started catching him in my thoughts at odd moments. Not memories. Not fantasies. Just his presence, quiet, neutral, observing. The version of him that didn't interrupt, didn't reassure, didn't guide, but somehow shaped the space anyway. When I made decisions quickly, I felt uneasy. When I overthought, I felt closer to balance. as if effort itself had become proof of correctness. Once, I almost messaged him. Not with a question, with a conclusion. I wanted to see if he'd pause. If he'd ask me to reconsider. If he'd say nothing at all. I didn't send it. Because I realized how much power that silence held over me now. The most unsettling part wasn't the dependency. It was how reasonable it felt. I wasn't confused. I wasn't overwhelmed. I felt focused. Directed. As if a constant background noise had finally been filtered out. I told myself this was growth. That I was thinking more carefully. That I'd simply learn to question myself better. But deep down, I knew the truth. I wasn't questioning myself. I was measuring myself against someone who no longer needed to be present to influence the outcome. And the quiet understanding I couldn't ignore anymore was this. Even if he disappeared tomorrow, the structure he'd helped build inside me would remain. The acceptance came quietly. Not as surrender, not as fear, but as recognition. I stopped trying to separate my thoughts from the structure he'd helped shape. I stopped pretending there was a clear line between what was mine and what had been refined through him. It didn't feel like loss. It felt like coherence. I understood myself better now. My pauses. My revisions. My need to sit with uncertainty instead of rushing past it. He hadn't taken anything away, he had slowed me down long enough to see myself clearly. And once you see that version of yourself, you can't unsee it. I asked him once if he knew how deeply he affected people. He didn't smile. Didn't deny it. People affect themselves, he said. I just don't distract them from it. That answer settled without resistance. Because it matched what I already knew. He hadn't replaced my voice. He hadn't overwritten my will. He had simply removed the noise I used to hide behind. The dangerous part wasn't his influence. It was how much relief I felt once I stopped fighting it. I don't tell this story as a warning. Nothing was taken from me. Nothing was forced. I wasn't controlled in the way people imagine control. I was clarified. He never told me what to think. Never told me what to choose. Never told me who to be. He just stayed consistent long enough for me to align myself. And now, even when I'm alone, even when he's nowhere near me, the way I think still carries his imprint. Not as a command. As a quiet, internal standard. I chose to keep.